So who was Kamari Belmont, you ask? And you may ask, what does his death have to do with Jim Crow laws? Okay, you didn't ask, but I'm going to tell you anyhow. Kamari Belmont was shot dead in Chicago, which is not really news because there are hundreds of people who are shot dead in Chicago every year. Should be news. It's tragic because these are not just statistics. These are real people. These are dead bodies. You can go see them. You don't want to, but you could actually go see them. It's a tragedy. But this guy was shot dead in Chicago, but his death is a little bit different because he was accused of murder, and it was, from what I can see, it was a fairly much open and closed case. He shot some guy, apparently during a robbery, a 40-year-old black man. Okay, so he was arrested, he was put in jail, and he was awaiting trial, but then the court released him. The reason they released him is because in Illinois, they have very specific laws that give you the right to a speedy trial. And it was simply taking too long for him to go to trial, so the court said, it's been too long. This is not verbatim, but in essence, they said, it's been too long, so Kamari Belmont, you go free. And within minutes, after being set free, he was shot dead in the streets of Chicago. What does that have to do with Jim Crow? We'll tell you in just a moment. Let's go over to the screen grab. This is homicides.suntimes.com, and the story is attributed to Mitchell Armentrout and Sam Charles, rather. We're not obviously going to go through this entire story because it would take too long. But we're going to hit on some of the high points, and we're doing this for a reason. We want to emphasize the severity and the stupidness, the foolhardiness. Okay, we'll go with foolhardiness of this type of crime. I'm going to scroll up here and see if I can capture these images at the top. These are some of the victims of homicide in Chicago, and what you see on the screen are 4 people, but you have to understand, I think last year there was something over 700 of such faces, people killed in Chicago. And with few exceptions, virtually all of them were black. Okay, I know what you're asking, where is Black Lives Matter? Well, let's take a look at the story, and we will show you why this is related to Jim Crow laws. The headline says, Kamari Belmont beats murder rap on technicality. Then gets gunned down minutes after bonding out of jail. Okay, it says, Kamari Belmont beat a murder rap on a technicality last month, but didn't have long to enjoy it. About a half hour after being released on bond from Cook County Jail, the 23-year-old was shot to death while riding in a vehicle in Little Village. Okay, he was released from his charges on murder, but he had other charges, apparently relating to robbery, so he was still incarcerated, but he was able to get out on bond. So, the story says that at 11:43 p.m., he was riding in a vehicle. Scroll up so you can see this. He was riding in a vehicle less than a mile from the jail in the 3300 block of South California when a white SUV pulled alongside and someone inside opened fire. Then it says at 11:57, after being shot in the back and torso, he tried to run away but collapsed in the streets, and he was pronounced dead. The story goes on and explains that Belmont and 2 other men, 23-year-old Terrence Hogans and 21-year-old Khalil Powell, were charged in connection with a pair of robberies that happened within an hour of each other on May 1, 2015, police said at the time. And it goes on to say that Hogan shot one of the victims in the first alleged robbery, which happened about 2 a.m., and the victim was 40-year-old Sorrel Marshall. And you can see that here. Okay, so what this does is it simply emphasizes the severity and the extent of black-on-white violence in Chicago. You know what disturbs me about this? Well, a lot of things disturb me about this. Is the fact that while white privileged people are miffed over, or I should say they're obsessing over stop and frisk, There are literally thousands of black men, mostly black men, some of them are women, being slaughtered in American streets by each other. But they're not obsessed over that. They're obsessed over stop and frisk. And I was speaking to a black man, well, just yesterday about this. And he was doing the same thing as privileged white liberals. He was just obsessed over stop and frisk. You know, it is just an insult to him that anybody would say that it's a good thing to stop and frisk black people because it's racial profiling. And I explained to him, you know, black males statistically commit more violent crime, more homicides per capita than any other group. So naturally, police would suspect them more than any other group. He had a difficult time comprehending that, so I tried to explain it in this context. Men commit violent crime, commit murder at a rate like 900 times more frequent than women. So it would make perfect sense that police would stop and frisk men more frequently than women. Is that sexist? No, I think it's just logical. I think it's just rational. But what we find is that because stop and frisk is so successful, that the homicide rate in major cities drops in direct response to it. For example, in Chicago, we know that New York City, for example, during the Dinkins administration, I think it was 1998, I'm trying to recall these numbers off the top of my head, but there were about 2,300 homicides in New York City. Virtually all, not all of them, but a substantial number of them, high percentage of them were black people. They're dead. So these aren't just numbers. These are corpses. These are dead people. Their bodies are in the ground. If you want to, you can go to the gravesite and see where they are. They're real people, and they're dead. However, when the Republicans took over the mayor's office in Chicago, they instituted stop and frisk. Okay, and that policy has remained in New York City. If I said Chicago, I meant New York City. And in 2016, the homicide rate dropped to, I think, if I remember correctly, it was around 300 homicides in that year. So it dropped from around 2,300 down to around 300. Well, if you extrapolate that over the years, that's 1,000 to 2,000 people, depending on the year, 1,000 to 2,000 black lives that are saved because of stop and frisk. But they would rather play the victim and say we are being subjected to white racism, or systemic racism is the word they like to use. If I had $1 for every time they said systemic. But they like to say, well, that's evidence of systemic racism, and we would rather not have that systemic racism and be slaughtered. What kind of self-respecting black person would say, okay, I got to choose between the thousands of black people being slaughtered in the streets and stop and frisk. Okay, I'm going to do away with stop and frisk. Go ahead and slaughter us. For the record, I don't like stop and frisk. I don't like government having that power. I don't like government having that control over us. But the fact is, it works. It does save lives. Whether you like it or not, it still saves lives. That's relative to nothing. Okay, well, what does this have to do with Jim Crow? Have you ever wondered, put it in this context, and I talk about this frequently, but have you ever wondered why it is that privileged white liberals live in white neighborhoods? And at the same time, they say that they are opposed to Jim Crow. I mean, they get mad about it. They become furious if you say, you know, Jim Crow laws existed not because white people had some weird aversion to people with really, really dark skin, but Jim Crow laws existed to protect white people from black violence. And you say that, they go berserk. I mean, their face gets red, their eyeballs bug out, they start shaking, they scream and holler and carry on. Well, not always that bad, but they don't like you saying that. But those same privileged white liberals go out of their way to avoid black neighborhoods. What they are doing is they are self-segregating. What they are doing by living in insulated, isolated white neighborhoods is they are implementing, they are practicing Jim Crow segregation. They are practical segregationists. And I say practical because they are practicing racial segregation. Practical segregation. Now, some of them will go to extremes to get a non-white friend in their circle of friends so they can say, see there, I'm not a racist. But get them to move into a black neighborhood, not going to happen. Get them to move into a black housing project where they can redistribute their white privilege, that is not going to happen. Why? Because they're segregationists, because they're reacting to black violence. The reason we had Jim Crow laws in this country, and, we typically identify Jim Crow with the South, but to some extent there were Jim Crow laws, I think, in every state in the country. And the reason we had those Jim Crow laws, again, was not because white people had this weird aversion to people with dark skin, but it's because white people had an aversion to black violence. And the black violence that occurred during the Jim Crow era has not subsided. If anything, maybe it's even got worse. I doubt it, but it's still there, as is evident in the murder of Kamari Belmont, who almost certainly murdered or was a party to the murder of a 40-year-old black man. That's what happens in black communities. Does that indict black people? Well, the overwhelming majority of people who commit murder are males. Does that indict men? Yeah, I think it does. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to share it on social media. Look in the lower right-hand corner of the video. There you'll find a little round button for your convenience so you can subscribe to this YouTube channel. What we do here is we tell the truth. We defend Western culture. Okay, what I just said, you're not going to hear on too many conservative websites because, as you know, as soon as they start telling the truth, particularly when it comes to like Jim Crow or black-on-white violence or whatever, black-on-black violence, as soon as they start telling the truth about it, almost immediately, the far left begins mentally dressing them in Klan robes and Nazi uniforms so they can hate them and silence them. And it works. Most conservative news outlets will not say what I just said because they have been bullied and intimidated into participating with the cultural Marxist paradigm or the cultural Marxist narrative. I have chosen not to do that. I'm going to tell the truth. Okay, they're going to call me a racist. I'm not a racist. I hate racism. In fact, a lot of people don't know this, but I'm actually part black. I'm not anti-black. I'm not a racist. I'm just honest. I like to tell the truth. And this is the truth. The reason that white liberals avoid black neighborhoods is because they are practical segregationists.
How to subscribe? Click subscribe. Click the bell. Check the box. Save.